Hi, welcome back to the Mud Puddle Theory. I am Jerry Quick, and I wrote the Mud Puddle Theory to unite and bring us closer together as a nation with the truth. In this video, I will be covering the civil rights movements to show how the blacks have been used and manipulated by propaganda to motivate them to march and protest for a cause that, while it has been productive, it has also led to us being further divided as a nation. Before I actually get started on this video, I first want to make sure that you have a better understanding of who I am and what I stand for. I do not advocate violence in any attempt to bring about change. I advocate that change can and should be brought about by peaceful means. While I don't always agree with the law, I believe in the rule of law and that everyone should be law-abiding and follow the law concerning their personal day-to-day conduct. I grew up in a very small rural city that was approximately 20 miles from Birmingham, Alabama, where some of the violent marches and protests took place during the civil rights movements. As I stated in an earlier video, we knew not to go to downtown Birmingham during the time frame when these protests were going on, but because my brother had bought a TV and brought it into our home, we were able to see the news footage that the news media took during those protests. I can tell you that it wasn't pretty. They were videos of blacks on top of the old post office building across from City Hall throwing Molotov cocktails at the firemen fighting the fires started by those Molotov cocktails, and police officers who were trying to restore order and put a stop to the violence. While the news media may have reported the number of firemen and police officers who were injured and are killed, I don't recall those numbers today. This was in my preteens and my teen years, so I didn't know then what I know now. The feeling at the time was that the police should just shoot them and put the survivors on a ship and send them back to Africa and let Africa deal with them. And at that time, I felt pretty much the same way. But, however, I was really confused at the time because I knew some black people who were really good people and did not participate in those violent protests. In the Mud Puddle Theory, I told about James and Billy, a black couple who had no children, and told me and my two siblings that we were their children, and I can assure you that they loved us and we loved them. I also told about the young black man who stood up for me, even though we had already formed a friendship bond. I not only became friends with him, but I became friends with his wife. I did get rather upset with her when she came in to my office to discuss his estate after he had died. She didn't call me because she knew that I would probably be the only white person at the funeral, and she didn't want me to feel uncomfortable. I didn't care how many blacks would have been there. I would have gone out of my love and respect for her and my friend. I can tell you other stories of additional blacks that I knew who did not participate in those violent protests, but I'm sure that you're not watching this video to hear personal stories about me, but you are watching this video to learn some truths about the civil rights movements. You want to learn what I have learned down through the years that will help you understand how the blacks were motivated by the propaganda they were told during the civil rights movements. I guess you have noticed that the civil rights movements is plural, meaning that there were more than one. While I do discuss several of the civil rights movements in the Mud Puddle Theory, I will mainly focus in this video on the civil rights movements by the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, which I will refer to as NAACP, and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference headed by Martin Luther King, which I will refer to as SCLC. These two groups joined together and were instrumental in the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which I plan on discussing in my next video, and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which I discussed in my prior video on the 14th Amendment. The NAACP was started by W.B. Du Bois in 1909, and the SCLC was not formed until the 1950s. Due to the lack of being able to finance and promote their movements, neither were able to have much success in promoting their agenda until they were able to get financial support from what a lot of people refer to as the Zionists. The Zionists not only provided financial support, but has also been credited with promoting the propaganda needed to motivate the blacks, and also provided the strategy for accomplishing their goals. Of course, at that time, the Zionists had another goal in mind: to divide us as a nation, and thus far it has worked. During the 1980s, when there was a lot going on between the blacks and the Klan, I had a young man and his mother come into my office and wanted to hire me to represent the young man. The first thing that the young man told me was that he was a Klansman, and that the case he wanted me to hire me to represent him on was a case concerning a counter demonstration in Decatur, Alabama. My initial reaction was to not agree to represent him, but then that would go against my principles that everyone was entitled to legal representation, no matter his or her political beliefs. So I reluctantly agreed to represent him, because I didn't know anything about the Klan other than what I had heard through the news media, which I knew was not always true. I was curious to talk with him and learn more about him and the Klan. One of the first questions I asked him is why he and the Klan hate blacks so much. His response surprised me when he said, "We don't hate the blacks, we see them as our enemies." He went on to say that the Jews had taken over the civil rights movement and that they were using the blacks as sacrificial lambs. While I did remember the black slaves being drafted during the Civil War by the Union and put on the front lines to fight for the Union, he told me about that during our conversation. Basically, he was comparing what happened during the Civil War to what was going on then. While I was doing research and preparing to write the Mudpole Theory, I wanted to talk to as many black people as I could to learn and get a better understanding of how black people felt and what they knew and understood about some of the subjects, issues that I would be covering in the Mudpole Theory. Well, I did get a chance to talk to several black people who were very open in talking with me. There was one young black man who really stood out. Well, I didn't know the young man very well. I knew that he was educated and had some historical knowledge concerning what we talked about. In talking with him, I was very careful not to lead him because my objective was to get his true feelings and opinions. During my conversation with him, he stated that his people, black people, were being used as sacrificial lambs and as political pawns, the same thing that my client had said. During my research and preparation to write the Mudpole Theory, I watched many videos by mainly young black men who were saying pretty much the same thing as my client and the young black man I talked to had said, even though they didn't use the term sacrificial lamb. The purpose and intent of their videos was to educate and inform other blacks concerning the truth about our true dark past history and how they were being used and manipulated as political pawns to promote the agenda of those who were using and manipulating them, which was usually the Democrats. And reading the comments of their videos, it was obvious that they were having some success, but it was also very obvious that they were also being met with a lot of resistance from other black people who were calling them various names and, in some cases, were actually threatening them. Even though they did meet some resistance, I felt that it was a good start and that, over time, the blacks would eventually become more educated and would begin to see the truth. which is my goal in writing the mud hole theory. When I began doing my YouTube videos, I have again focused my attention on watching videos posted by black people to get a better knowledge and understanding concerning how black people feel today. Concerning the issues that I not only discuss in mud hole theory, but also in my videos. Recently, I have been watching a lot of the hashtag walking away videos that have been posted by black people on YouTube. The theme now seems to be more about free thinking and making their own decisions without being told what to do and what to think. Even though I don't plan on doing a video concerning the midterm elections, I will say that I was very disappointed concerning what happened during the midterm elections. As I have previously stated, I'm not a Republican, I'm not a Democrat, I'm not an independent, I'm not affiliated with any political party. My main focus has always been on the candidates, regardless of their party affiliation. What disappointed me about the midterm elections is that it is still more about race and not about who is most qualified. When we stop making everything about race, racism will disappear. The main issue used to motivate the blacks during the civil rights movements was slavery, an issue which I previously discussed in one of my prior videos. Slavery, not about race. The blacks were being told that they had been victims of slavery, and while that was partially true, they were not told the complete truth. The blacks were not told that whites had also been victims of slavery, that there were blacks who were not slaves, but who had actually participated in the institution of slavery. For a more complete discussion, watch my video on slavery and read the chapter on slavery in the mud hole theory. At the time of the civil rights movement, slavery was blamed on the white majority, and when it was later learned that less than 1.5% of the population actually owned slaves, and that a small percentage of those that owned slaves were blacks, the term then changed from white majority to white privilege. In my prior videos, I did talk about a video that I had watched by a young black man by the name of Brian Tatum. The title of his video was White Privilege, My Explicit S. In his video, we talked about whites that he worked with who were struggling to pay their student loans, and that he had gotten a scholarship to go to college, so he didn't have to repay a student loan. He also talked about how he had gotten a promotion on his job within 2 years, something that was unheard of. Of course, white privilege is just another form of propaganda that is intended to divide us into races. In another video, I will discuss affirmative action and how it has discriminated against the whites. When President Lyndon B. Johnson signed the executive order creating affirmative action, he stated that the blacks would be voting for Democrats for the next 200 years, and thus far he has been right. Another issue that the civil rights movements advocated was the blacks' right to reparations because of being victims of slavery. While there is no doubt that some of the blacks were descendants of slaves, not all were descendants of slaves and could not prove their entitlement to reparations. As part of the argument that they were entitled to reparations, they pointed to payments that were being made to the Native Americans for lands that were taken from the Native Americans by the U.S. government. These were payments made for lands and not for reparations. If the truth be known, we probably still owe the Native Americans for lands taken by our government. The only time that I am aware of when our government has paid reparations to any U.S. citizen is when it was paid to the Japanese after World War II. After Japan bombed Pearl Harbor and forced the U.S. to join World War II, the U.S. started picking up anyone of Japanese descent and put them into concentration camps where they were held until after the war ended. When Congress did pass legislation to pay reparations to the Japanese, it was paid only to the ones who were still living and not to their families. As to slavery, that was not an action taken by government, but was an action taken by individuals for profit. Even if one could meet the burden of proving that they were slaves, they would have to seek relief from individuals and not from the government. It would be very unlikely if there were any surviving slaves during the civil rights movements. Blacks during the civil rights movements were also demanding their piece of the economic pie. In other words, they were complaining that they were not being hired for jobs because of the color of their skin. In other words, because they were black. And while there was some truth to their claims, most of them were very, very poor and were not educated, so most of them did not have the skills that they needed to qualify for a lot of the jobs that were available. There were also poor whites who were uneducated and didn't have the skills needed to qualify for a lot of the same jobs that the blacks were complaining that they were not being hired for. Essentially, this is more about being poor and uneducated and not based on the color of their skin. There is no doubt that after the Civil War, and more specifically after Reconstruction, when the whites were given back their right to vote, the blacks were discriminated against by the color of their skin. When the black codes, Jim Crow laws were passed. In my prior video on the Civil War, I did give an explanation of why the black codes, Jim Crow laws were passed, but I also stated that there was no justification, nor could I condone the black codes, Jim Crow laws. This is one of the main focuses of the civil rights movements, and I agree that they were wrong and were due to be changed and done away with. This was accomplished by the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, something I will discuss in my next video. Martin Luther King, in his I Have a Dream speech that he made before the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C., stated that, "I have a dream that the day will come when a man will not be judged by the color of his skin, but by his character." A quote which I often use, not only in the mudpole theory, but also in my videos and comments that I have made to other videos that I have watched on YouTube. While Martin Luther King has a dream, I have a vision that the day will come when we are truly equal and when government will become race neutral. In talking with black people and white people, their interpretation of Martin Luther King's speech was that we are all equal and that we should be treated that way. Several times during his speech, he used the term, "my white brother." In my prior video, Race, More Alike Than Different, I specifically pointed out where our differences are actually based on genetics and not on race. In 2 weeks, I will be 72 years young, and during my life, I have not only seen and pretty much been a witness to not only the civil rights movements, but to a lot of other incidents that have divided us as a nation. We cannot depend on government to unite and bring us closer together as a nation. It is a duty and responsibility of we the people to accomplish that goal. Before we have any hope of accomplishing our goal, you must know and understand the underlying causes for our division, something which you will learn from reading the Mudpole Theory and from watching my videos. Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and feel free to share this video. I not only welcome, but I encourage you to leave your comments below so that we can have productive and meaningful conversations concerning the issues that I talk about. Please, no cursing, profanity, or name calling. As I've stated in my other videos, if you want to correct me and give me with the authorities, then go right ahead. I would love to hear from you, and I'd love to learn. Again, thank you so much for watching this video.